Okay, page 5 of your workbooks, please. Losing heart with God's life and love. Can a Christian couple who knows the way get lost in the journey? Unfortunately, we all know the answer to that is yes. Probably most, if not all of us, have experienced the pain of someone very close to us, maybe even ourselves, have experienced the pain of a Christian marriage that has ended in divorce. And I remember so vividly, not so long ago, when somebody that I knew that was a Christian and had a broken marriage, the way I would respond, now I'm embarrassed and ashamed to say, but I would be so shocked, so devastated. And I guess in some way we should still be shocked, but it's a shock at what the enemy has done and more of becoming aware of his plot to destroy a marriage, but not so shocked that how could it happen to them? You know, I never ever thought, they have it together. Or, you know, their family, their kids, it just looks like they have everything on the ball. I would have never thought, what in the world happened? How could that happen? You know, and those would be my attitudes and my remarks because I didn't really understand what could happen and how it could happen even in a Christian marriage. But can a Christian marriage get lost on the journey? It can. How does this happen? And that's part of why we share our story tonight, is we want to expose exactly how this happens so you can become aware and to recognize. That's why we shared the ambushes, so you can recognize the dangers that are there and to recognize the fact that every single one of us is vulnerable. And it's a really dangerous place to be, to think, not me. I would never do that. Now, I might do this, or I might dabble a little bit in this, but I would never leave my marriage. I would never let my heart fall astray and fall in love with somebody other than my spouse. I just couldn't do that. I just know better. Probably nobody here thinks that and assumes that, but if you do, I really ask you to think again about that, because that's a really scary place to be. When we don't recognize the danger and we think that we are immune to it, we're in more of a dangerous position than those of us that are fully aware of what's out there and what the enemy wants to do. We need to realize, no, it could happen to me, so what am I going to do about that? How am I going to protect my heart and our marriage? First of all, it happens gradually. Most often, 99% of the time, when a marriage fails, it's happened gradually in a way that you don't recognize that you're growing apart. You know the story about the frog in the boiling water, that if the frog's sitting on a counter and he hops into a pot of water that may be room temperature, and the heat goes on underneath the pot of water and it gradually increases in the heat, that the frog in the water doesn't recognize the danger it's in because it's gradually being warmed up, and he will literally stay in that water until it takes his life. But that same frog, if it was sitting on a counter and it hopped into a pot of boiling water, would immediately recognize the danger and hop right out and save its life. That just kind of illustrates what can happen in our marriages. It happens in a gradual way. Little, not even indiscretions at first, just ways that we maybe become critical of our spouse and we open up our heart to other things and soothe our heart, build up a wall. Those kind of things over a period of time, those things gradually cause our relationship to drift apart. And so oftentimes when we see a marriage fail, it's because of things that have happened over a period of time and we haven't seen, maybe as outsiders. But actually, sometimes the couple themselves, it's so gradual they don't recognize it's happening, and that's what's scary and so dangerous. The other element that's usually involved is deception. And by this, or it's always involved. And what I mean by deception is not necessarily one spouse is deceiving the other spouse, but it's the deception that we believe we're missing out on something. It's a deception that the enemy starts to tell us that we deserve better. Surely God intended us to enjoy love in a relationship, in a marriage. Surely He didn't intend for us to have to endure the pain that we feel like that we're enduring anyways in our relationship. And we begin to become deceived. The enemy tells us things and we start to believe them. And because of that deception, that is what is always involved in a failed relationship. So where does it all begin? How does this happen? How do we find ourselves totally disconnected and in a relationship that is in trouble, in serious trouble? Well, if you turn to the next page, page 6 in your workbooks, we're going to spend the rest of this evening on this page. It's called The Journey to Disconnectedness. The Journey to Disconnectedness. How I wish I had been exposed to this understanding of this journey to disconnectedness, because the sad part is we are on this journey unless we take precautions to stay off of it. And so we can be ignorant of the fact that we are taking steps down this journey that will take us somewhere we do not want to go. But unless we recognize it, unless somebody warns us and somebody speaks into our life and we realize that we are in a dangerous position, we will continue on the journey, because it's kind of like the default. This is just the way we go unless we take up a strong protection and guard our hearts against it. This is where we will go. It starts at the top of the page, it says, with fatigue. Fatigue. Basic, we can all relate. It's Friday night. If you work a Monday to Friday job, it's the end of your week. Your kids are done with school. You've done the routine, and we are fatigued. As a society, we fill our lives and cram our lives with the schedule that doesn't compare to generations ago. We are all fatigued. And so in and of itself, fatigue is not a sin, but it's a dangerous place to be. And again, just like we talked about the ambushes, the main thing we want you to recognize is we're highlighting these things so you can be on guard against them. What happens when you're fatigued? You know how you react. Some people will react in a way that they're short-tempered, kind of mean-spirited, impatient. Other people don't act that way at all when they're tired. They're more withdrawn and sullen and quiet and want to be to themselves. And I'm seeing some elbows going and people are relating. Being tired and being fatigued is something that we have to recognize in relationship to our marriage. We have to realize what it does to our spouse. How do we act when we're fatigued? How do we respond to them, to their needs, to their pain? Or worse yet, what happens if we're both fatigued at the same time? And that's pretty common, especially out here in California. The schedules and the times that we the speed of life, being fatigued wears against us. And again, if there are changes that you can decide tonight as you analyze your schedule and your family and your home life, there might be things that you say, you know what? That's right, that does cause us a lot of stress. We've counseled with a couple for a couple years, actually, who have been commuting. Both of the spouses have had to commute to San Diego from Hemet area. So it's a definite lengthy commute, and just recently have been able both to relocate their jobs up right into the same city as where they live. And their need for counseling has just about dropped off. They said, maybe we'll still meet with you once a month just for maintenance and type, but we just can't believe the stress that's relieved from our home and our children because we don't have that commute. So things like that that cause your life to be fatigued, you might be able to analyze and you might want to make some changes. Sometimes we just have to say, you know what, this is the season of life that I'm in. It's busy, it's crazy, and I'm going to be fatigued. But what we want you to do tonight is to realize, how does this affect my relationship when I'm fatigued? And what can I do about it? It might be as simple as recognizing that you are short, impatient, and that you acknowledge that to your spouse and just say, you know what, I am sorry for the way I responded to you when you came home from work today. I am just exhausted. I don't want you to have to pay the price for that, though, and I'm sorry. And that's all. And when we do those simple things, that takes us off the journey of disconnectedness. If we don't acknowledge it, and we let those irritating things stay and not acknowledge them, not apologize for them, then we're going to continue on the journey to disconnectedness. And it's a journey you don't want to be on.
You've heard the verse that says, be angry and sin not. Well, I like to say, be tired and sin not. I think a lot of times we don't realize what this fatigue and tiredness is doing to us. I certainly didn't. We have some pastors in this room. And I just want to say, as an addendum to this, pray for your pastor. Pray for your pastors. They are under constant stress. I know that we lived being tired. And most pastors are fatigued most of the time, and they don't realize the effect that it has upon them emotionally, spiritually, and beyond. And it's a tremendous weight, and we all have it, but I just feel like we need to make note of that I know when I look back on our years of pioneering that church and pastoring, it was constant. It never let up. And I just thought, well, this is my life. This is what God's called me to. His strength is my strength, and my weakness He's made strong. I'm going to be okay. I'd pull up my bootstraps and everything was going to be just fine. But I wasn't realistic, was I? I didn't realize what that fatigue was actually doing to me. And I didn't understand, as Linda mentioned, I didn't understand the effect that this journey was going to have on me. I didn't know where my fatigue was going to lead. Well, it certainly happened in my life, and I'm ashamed to say that my fatigue definitely led to the second part of this journey, and that is what we call irritability and insensitivity. We've borrowed this model from Dr. Tim Clinton. It changed our life, and when we saw this in a step format of what can happen, it changed our lives. It showed us something that we didn't see the progression. We've had so many people come to us and say, that journey to disconnectedness opened my eyes. I had no idea where I was. I've had so many come to me and say, we're way down the list. We're hurting. They didn't really recognize where they were. I hope that this journey, this model, will give you an understanding where you might be as you investigate your own heart and life. I didn't realize that my fatigue was showing up in this ugly way of being insensitive to my wife and my children. But that insensitivity and irritability was pretty much a daily routine for me. I would have to give so much at the office as a pastor and with my staff and with what God had put on my heart. I thought that was so right to give all of my energies there. And I came home with very little left. And if there was a demand on me, I loved my wife, I loved my kids, I loved our home. We had a wonderful home, dinner together every night. The kids were in sports and we did all kinds of fun things. We had vacation every year. We had what most would consider a healthy home. I didn't realize, though, what effect my fatigue that showed up in irritability and insensitivity was doing to Linda and my children, closing their spirit to me because I didn't know how to lovingly speak in a way that would encourage and strengthen them. Because I felt justified in the fact that I'd given so much to everyone else that they just should understand how hard it was, how much I'd given to others. They were there with me in the long run. I needed them to understand that. And that was selfish and inappropriate for me to expect them to take the leftovers of my heart instead of what they deserved. But fatigue did that to me. And it showed up for me, and I found very many others, in an irritability and insensitivity, and it would show up in the way that I respond to Linda in particular, and my inability to hear her heart caused a tremendous crack. This hairline crack that started between our relationship started with my language to her. The way that I talked to her, the way I responded to her, that script from my past that she told you about earlier. If she'd say something that was a little critical, or maybe she just asked me a question that was meant to clarify something, I would take that as a threat. I would feel like she was making me look bad, or that I had failed in some way. She pushed my failure button and I would just respond in ways that was so negative. Now, it wasn't that I didn't love her. I loved her with all of my heart. That's the scary thing about this. How can we love our spouse, and yet these things affect us in ways that we don't even see what it's doing? It happened to me. And so I understand it firsthand, and perhaps some of you can relate to that firsthand as well, and to see the effect of fatigue on you, where in your workbooks you'll see that we gave some examples of snap, yell, fly off the handle, close down, nonverbals. We talk about communication, and I find that it's often not just what we say, but sometimes what we don't say. And those nonverbals and the body language that we can often communicate to our spouse in ways that we say to them that we aren't happy with them, or we're tired of them asking me the same question over and over again. We may not even say anything, but because we're one, we know exactly what that person's trying to tell us, whether they use words or not. And we have to be very, very cautious and very aware of what is happening with our fatigue level, coming off of those highways and coming into your home and being stressed out, and your spouse perhaps has been there taking care of business and trying to get everything ready for you to come home, and then throws something at you and you don't know how to respond to it, and then we find this negative cycle that can begin like that. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, and maybe you didn't even realize that the way you got there was just simply because you're tired. And you think, well, how am I going to fix that? There are things that we can do. We'll talk more about that as we go through the weekend, but it's important that we realize where we are at least on this journey, irritability and insensitivity. So as this continues and perhaps goes unchecked, it progresses from moving against our spouse to moving away from our spouse. That hairline crack sets in, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves drifting, islands unto ourselves, just trying to make it work, just trying to get by, doing what we have to do to make it, not realizing that our fatigue and our insensitivity toward each other is causing us to drift further and further apart. We distance our heart from one another, and we don't even at first realize that it's happening.
And again, if we don't acknowledge that to each other, or maybe we're in a relationship where it's not safe to acknowledge that and to bring that up. I think of one example that would illustrate what Tim was talking about, where I would say something that I did not have a clue that this would push his button. To me, I was just being a helpful, supportive wife. He was the pastor. Surely he wanted my input on how Sunday went, and I would never criticize his message. If I thought it wasn't good, I just didn't say anything. But I would try very hard to always be positive about that. But sometimes there were other things that happened in the flow of the service that I thought, well, I'm sitting down there. I see them as somebody in the congregation. I thought he'd want to have that input. And so I'd share something like, somebody on the worship team was really flat today, and I think I know who it was. You might want to turn their mic down. They have a little problem staying on key. I thought I was being helpful. So you can relate, some of you, to, I just said something innocently. Tim, again, because of the script from his past, it looked like a flag went up. He thought he was being disrespected like his dad had been in their home. And because he was tired, he saw that as me telling him and anybody else at the table that heard that he was a failure as a senior pastor. He wasn't doing a good job. Because if he was doing a good job, that wouldn't have happened, and he would have caught that, and why did he need me to help him? So it's a little scenario. It just happened several times, so I can remember
And looking
that
back, it's silly. But I saw the time I invested in those people. In many cases, I had handpicked them to do what they were doing, and I took it as a personal reflection. Now, talk about selfish, self-centered, that I saw that as a reflection on me, and I couldn't hear her heart to help me be better at what we were doing. But We hope that it can be an illustration of perhaps some buttons that you might have, perhaps different, but because the same journey is there for all of us, you might react differently, but it could be just as severe as that, and it certainly worked against us.
And in our situation, which you might relate to this, and I hope not, but there might be some here tonight that feel like maybe you'd listen to that story and say, okay, well, Linda, why didn't you just, sit down and talk to him and say, no, I didn't mean that to offend you. That's not what I was saying. And you have this heart-to-heart talk and get right off this journey to disconnectedness. Well, if you have this kind of setting, you understand that that wouldn't have worked, unfortunately. And it's embarrassing to share that because it wasn't a safe environment for either one of us to be really honest. And now we recognize the importance of that, and we talk a lot about that tomorrow. And we don't usually even talk about it right now in the conference, but it came to my mind, and I'll insert it for this purpose, that tonight, when you do your homework, there's 2 or 3 questions that we encourage you to ask each other. Allow tonight to be a safe place for your spouse. Allow them to be honest, because the honesty is where it's all going to start. And rather than being defensive and rather than trying to explain away why you are the way you are, try to hear their heart and allow it to be a safe place where you can hear, what are they saying? They're not accusing me. I don't have to be this bad person. They're telling me something that's causing them pain or disappointment. I need to hear their heart. They're the one I love the most with all my heart, and I want to love them. I want them to know I love them. And so allow there to be a safe place in your relationship tonight as you share.
Good.
Thirdly, on this journey to disconnectedness, if you don't get off, you'll find yourself in a place called aloneness. And aloneness is where we start to pull away even further. We feel like nobody seems to understand, least of all our spouse. They don't even really know what I'm feeling. Even if I would share it with them, they're not hearing me. There's no closeness. There's no intimacy. Not necessarily physically, but emotionally, you're not connected anymore. And Genesis 2:18 tells us, it is not good for man to be alone. It is not good for any of us to be alone. And when we are this far down the journey of disconnectedness, we are beginning to become alone. We may still go through all the motions of being married, do everything morning till night. Our spouse might not even recognize it, but we know in our heart of hearts that we're really alone. We do not feel emotionally connected to them anymore. And for whatever reason, if it's out of protection, we've pulled ourselves away. If it's just because this is what we do when we're tired, we go in our little hole and try to make life easy for us. Whatever the reason and the excuse is, the result is serious and dangerous because God never intended us to be alone. We will not stay alone very long. When we are alone, evil begins to flourish. James 1:14 says, "But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed." This is what started to happen to me, and this again happened very gradually over many, 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 many years. As Tim spoke in a disrespectful way and in a harsh way, from my perspective, it appeared to me that it was anger. Now, I've done some reading and studying a little bit about the whole anger issue, and now I recognize that it really wasn't anger on his part. That wasn't like he had this anger problem, but I perceived it as that because I grew up in a home where there wasn't raised voices. Like I said, my dad was the boss, so why would you raise your voice to challenge it? It's just the way it was. So, and my mom was meek and mild-mannered, so that's how I approached this situation. So rather than challenge or confront Tim, I withdrew and became more alone. And so, again, as a pastor's wife, I feel like I felt at the time there wasn't anybody I could really talk to. about it. My friends were in the church. He was their pastor. How could I talk to anybody? Now I recognize not only is that serious, but it's incorrect. God always has somebody for us, and there were women in my life that I could and should have reached out to that would have guided me and taught me correctly on what to do in my situation. So I encourage you to find a good mentor person in your life if that's what you need. But for me, I withdrew, became more alone, and as I did that, I just thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being a good wife, still going through all the motions, a good mom, doing all the routine at home that you're supposed to do, and supporting Tim. But I didn't recognize what was really happening in the important part of our life, which was our relationship, is this hairline crack that had started. Now it was getting farther and farther apart. The months that would go on, and then a year would go on, of that kind of interaction, then the crack would get wider and wider until we found ourselves disconnected.
I like to say at this point that on this journey, when you get to aloneness, this is the place where the U-turn that you need to make is the easiest. Because if you are here today and you recognize that there is a certain amount of aloneness that's set in, you at home, you feel like a stranger, you feel like a piece of furniture, you don't know where you fit, you don't feel respected, you don't feel loved, you don't feel secure, you don't feel safe. Whatever all those feelings and reasons are, we have to realize the effect that may be having on our hearts and ultimately upon our intimacy in our relationship with our spouse. If you are at this place where you sense this crack has widened, so to speak, and you are together, but you're not connected. One of our definitions for true intimacy is emotional honesty. If you sense that the honesty is gone, you're no longer able to say what's on your heart. You don't feel respected and loved. You don't know that the other person really cares about what your opinion is or even what you do with your life. You're just doing what you got to do to survive. If you're at a point where you feel some of those feelings, understand that this is the point at which you've got to turn this ship around. Because if you allow this journey to continue and you go to the next level, this is where it gets very, very dangerous. Because the next level is what we call arrogance and alienation. Here we begin to feel sorry for ourselves. We begin to say things like, I deserve to be happy. We ask questions like, nobody cares for me. Does anybody care for me? We begin to start legitimizing and validating and justifying some of our actions because we have to do what we have to do to make it. So then our hearts begin to drift, and we can find ourselves going all kinds of directions. Some of those will be illegitimate in their activity. We might find ourselves leaning towards just liking the attention of somebody at work. Well, we'd never do anything wrong, but our aloneness has caused us to feel alienated, and we feel that we need someone to validate us again. I've dealt with so many couples where they thought they would never go the wrong direction, but they were so needy. All any of us want, ladies and gentlemen, is to be loved. I've heard it 100 times, if not 1,000 times. All I wanted was to be loved. All of us want to be loved, not just the ladies. The men want to be loved. They want to know that they're respected, honored, cared for, appreciated. Ladies, you want to know that you're secure, that you're cared for, that you're protected, that you're honored in a way that you know that this husband of yours is going to be there for you as your knight in shining armor. And gentlemen, we were designed for just that. And if we come to a place where we don't feel we have that, and we aren't honest emotionally with where our hearts are at, that crack will widen. And then we'll begin to alienate ourselves in such a way that arrogantly we will say, well, I've got to do what I've got to do. No longer are we just alone, but we have now become totally cut off from that person. We often in my experience, we become extremely defensive. You see, I didn't realize there was a possibility that in my relationship with Linda, even though my journey looked different than hers, I found that I too, perhaps because I had forced her into aloneness, as a result of that, I too felt alone and didn't know it. I was too dumb to figure it out. I just put it on autopilot because that's what we guys do. Just do what we got to do to make it. And I didn't realize the effect that aloneness in my own heart was having. And as a result of that, I found myself also becoming arrogant. Well, why is she treating me like that? Where did that come from? I can remember saying that to her one time. Where did that come from? Now I look back on that and how ugly that is. How arrogant that was of me to think that she couldn't be hurt by something that I did or said. And yet many of us live in that place where we actually think those things. And we arrogantly begin to believe that we can make life work independent from God. In your workbooks, there's a text box that I want you to be aware of. And here's what it says. Unless deceitful hearts are broken and our absolute weakness is revealed, we continue the illusion about ourselves that independent from God, we can make life work. That is arrogant. And yet, in some ways, many of us have allowed our hearts to go to a place that because of our circumstances, because we feel unloved, because of the ambushes that might be in our lives, we have gotten to a place where we actually believe that we deserve to do what we're doing. And I don't know what that might be, and I'm not going to venture into some of those places that our hearts can go, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. Some of them are okay, socially respectable. Others are inappropriate, and what we would refer to as sinful. But the bottom line is they are all ways for us to anesthetize our pain. Ways for us to avoid the conflict and the fact that we don't feel loved or secure or important in our relationship. And that arrogance, to make it work, can often lead us in places that we do not want to go. In fact, another statement says this, that it is clinically proven that the drive for relationship is stronger than the drive for food. Now, Linda and I have vowed this weekend that when we get back home, we're going to go on a diet. I like to eat. I enjoy food. And if my drive for relationship is stronger than my drive for food, what does that tell you? I went on a 40-day fast. I lost 40-some pounds. It was one of the most wonderful and difficult things I've ever done. And there came a point where I couldn't survive any longer without eating. And yet there are some of you in this room, perhaps, some that are listening to this DVD, where you have been unloved for a lot longer than 40 days. And your heart is hurting and you feel so detached and so disconnected. And this journey of disconnectedness has taken a bad turn for you. And all you want is to be loved. Your need, your desire, your drive for relationship is actually stronger than your drive for food. And some of you are at a point where you don't know what to do. How are you going to meet this need that you know you have? And it feels like it's going unmet. Well, if you don't turn this ship around, you'll continue on this journey and it'll take you places that you don't want to go. And that takes us to our next step.
Adulteries of the heart. Because, as Tim shared, it's clinically proven our drive for relationship is stronger than our drive for food, we will seek out what we need if we are not in relationship with our spouse. Now, we will do this oftentimes while we're still married. It's not like I want a divorce and I'm going to seek out something else. Because we're in pain, we will seek out something to take care of this pain. We're trying to fulfill this need that we have for relationship. Now, as Christians, we know that it's totally wrong for us to find that appeasement to our pain in somebody else, in another person. So as Christians, we will try to find another way to ease the pain and take care of it. Our relationship isn't working. Our need is stronger than our need for food, so we're going to do something. What are some of the things that we do that are socially acceptable even within the Christian circle? Sometimes we'll become a workaholic. Becoming a workaholic at least fulfills some of that I'm missing. I get some accolades. I get applause. I feel successful there. At least I feel fruitful. Other times we might seek out things that aren't necessarily accepted, but we can keep them in secret, like pornography. Pornography is something that not only has a strong foothold amongst the male population, it is increasingly becoming something that's common among the female population also. Why? Why is that? Because we're trying to help this pain that we're in. We're trying to ease the need that is in our heart, this desire, this need for relationship. And I'm married, but I'm not really in relationship. I am not emotionally connected to this person. Not only am I not connected to them, they really bug me, and I don't like them. So I have to do something to ease that pain. Pornography, flirting, being a workaholic, fantasizing. This is something that's really common amongst us women, is to fantasize. Whether it's through reading romance novels or movies, or just we spend a lot of time. The female problem is within our minds and what we do with our minds. So fantasizing, and you know if you struggle with that, you know if you retreat to that, and you are imagining yourself with somebody else or imagining your marriage to be something different than it is. Another common way to fulfill that need, especially for women, but it happens for husbands too, is to become what I call a kidaholic. To pour your affections that were intended for your spouse, to pour them into your children, to set your heart upon them, to allow them to have a place in your heart that God intended for your spouse to have. It seems so God-honoring and so worthy. And believe me, if I have a soapbox to be on, it is one to be a godly mother and to take care of your children. And I believe that there are a lot of children in our society that are in a lot of pain in their homes. Yeah. So I don't second guess that calling by any means. But in my life, it became out of balance. Because it wasn't safe for me, I felt, to approach Tim and to have a relationship when almost everything that I would bring up to talk about, I either felt like he wasn't interested, or he felt criticized and he would get defensive and react. Eventually, I just wouldn't try anymore. So I would share my heart with my kids, not necessarily share with them about my pain, about my marriage, but share their joys. And I would find my thrill and fulfillment in the things that they found in their life. When one of them had a success, a triumph, a victory, that became my joy in an inappropriate and unbalanced way. I didn't recognize that. I didn't know that. I was having the time of my life, enjoying their childhood and teenage years. I didn't realize that I was giving to them the part of my heart that I was to have given Tim. And that really catapulted into disaster when, as you know, kids grow up, and our eldest went away to college. He didn't go far, he only went an hour away, but he left our home, and I knew it would never be the same. He didn't need dad and mom like he had up until then. And we were a very close family, and I'm so grateful for that. And I always want it to be that way. But I realized that he was venturing out. He was a healthy young man. He didn't need mom anymore. And I wasn't ready for what that would do to me emotionally. Wasn't ready at all. It hit me upside of the head like I couldn't believe. When I look back now, I wonder if I even had a nervous breakdown. I don't know, and that's not really important, but the point is, I was at a place where I had poured my heart into him. I had given to him the part of my heart that should have been for my spouse that God intended to be with me the rest of my life. And here Josh is going off, and he's happy. He doesn't need me. Our daughter was in her late teen years by then, very independent. I was starting to see her not to need me in the same way too. All of that happened. He went away to college in September. 2 months later, in November, is when Tim was diagnosed with hepatitis C. And in January, he began his treatment. I didn't realize what was going on, but I was emotionally struggling through a lot of things. Just a year before that, the academy had closed. I was at a loss for where was my worth, where's my heart, who am I connected to? I didn't know that my drive for that relationship was stronger than the drive for food. So I didn't recognize the dangerous position that I was in. Tim started his treatment in January. And when you're sick, most of you can identify with the fact that when you're sick, the parts of you that weren't very nice when you were healthy, they get a lot worse.
That was sweet, huh?
He became a little more irritable.
Yeah.
And it was a hard place. And our story isn't any different than some of yours. You probably have stories that are much more seriously devastating, and the pain that you've had to go through. But because I was on that journey, we were on that journey, because we were so disconnected, we found ourselves at a place that we weren't ready for.
Right.
We didn't get it. Was I serving the Lord then? Absolutely. Was I in the Word? Was I having my quiet time, my devotions every day? I was. I was exercising with headphones that had worship music on. I was praising the Lord. I loved God with all of my heart. But because this happened gradually, and because there was deception involved, because the enemy found his way into my heart, to my mind, and started telling me things that I deserved to be happier. God saw the pain that I was in, and the hurts, and the journal entries that I would write. He saw every one of those. Yep. And I believed, because he loved me so much, that he wanted a better life for me. And that part is all true. But because I arrogantly tried to independently solve that on my own, I didn't know how to go to him with that area of my life. I had believed God for miracles in so many areas. So many miracles I had seen. But for some reason, I didn't believe God could work in this area. And I think because I knew it involved people, personalities, and I didn't have the faith to believe that God could change personalities, change hearts. And so Josh left, Tim is sick, my heart's open and exposed, and I don't share that to be an excuse in any way. God knows that. He knows my heart. It's not an excuse. It's an explanation. And I explain it so you can see, am I anywhere close to that? Am I anywhere close to that? Have I given my heart over to anything or any other person other than my spouse? Examine that in your own heart. Only you know. Probably your spouse doesn't even know. And I wouldn't have known. Like, I wonder sometimes if I had been in a seminar like this and had been asked these questions, would I have got it? Would the light have gone on? Because it seemed so appropriate, so proper to be a good mom. I don't know if I'd have recognized it. I'd like to think I would have. But I was oblivious. We were totally unaware of where our relationship was. In Tim's illness, it got worse and worse to the point of 3 months into his treatment, I sent out emails. He wasn't even sitting at his desk doing email by then. He wasn't in the pulpit on Sundays or anything. So I sent out an email to many, many of our friends across the country and asked them to just really pray. Because as much as I felt disconnected to him, I loved him. I didn't want the enemy to take his life, and that was where we were. And in the course of sending out these emails, one of the parties that responded, another pastor friend, we'd known him for 26 years. He'd been in our wedding. He was a good friend, and he loved Tim. He respected Tim, and he was so grieved to hear about the illness that he corresponded most often of all the friends. And over the course of a few weeks, it doesn't take long when your heart is open and vulnerable and in pain and needing to feel loved. In just a few weeks, he started sharing with me the pain that he was in his marriage. And you know, I've taught this before, I've shared it with other women, and I knew that it was inappropriate for him to be talking to me as a female about his marriage. But you know, and this is what happened, this is how deception works. I rationalized it in that situation because, well, he would be talking to Tim if Tim was healthy, and Tim can't be at the computer right now. I'm kind of here in Tim's place. And he's 2,000 miles away anyway. He lives in Michigan, so, you know, it's okay. He doesn't have anybody else to talk to, right? And it didn't take very long for me to respond to the pain that he was in by saying I just at first send a little sentence or two. Well, you know, you're not the only one that's not happy in your marriage, and Tim and I, you know, aren't the best of friends anyways right now, so if you think you have a bad story, you should hear mine. Those kind of sentences, just send those out, you know, just really hoping that he'd say, really, tell me more. And at first, he was very loyal to Tim and supported him and said, oh, I know Tim better than that. But eventually I wore him down until he started asking more, and I started to open up, and I shared with him the hurt that I had had, the disappointments from my unrealistic expectations, the pain that I had had over so many years and had nobody to tell it to. All of a sudden, here it goes. And it fell upon ears of somebody that responded in a way that felt good to me. Like, no, really? I would never believe that. Oh, you deserve better than that. Oh, I just can't imagine that. I can't imagine anybody treating you like that. I sure never would have. And it would just go from there to more emotionally charged comments back and forth to each other until I realized, and I remember, and ironically, it was on my anniversary, wedding anniversary, I remember being awakened to the thought, whoa. I have crossed an emotional boundary here that's totally inappropriate. I never set out to do this. And I wrote him and told him, this is going to be my last email. We've crossed lines that we never should have crossed. We shouldn't be talking about these things. And when Tim's healthy enough to talk to you, then he'll be writing you. But we have to stop. This has to stop. why, well, I do know why. He responded to that email by being very respectful, and he disagreed. He didn't see that, or said he didn't see that we had done that, but that he would respect my wishes and not email anymore. And if only that were the end of the story. But it's not. It was less than 2 hours from when he wrote that email that I found myself back at that computer writing him, saying, well, maybe it's okay if we write. I mean, as long as we know, these are the boundaries and we don't want to do anything inappropriate. And see, my heart was longing for relationship. I didn't have a safe place to go, or so I thought. And I sought out to anesthetize the pain that I was in through this relationship. I was so deceived. And this all happened in such a short amount of time. It's unbelievable how once you start that downward spiral, that part goes really quickly. It builds up gradually, but once you make some decisions like that, it just snowballs. And I remember being at the church mailbox and opening an invitation to a conference in the area of ministry that I was in charge of. See, I was still a pastor's wife. How does that happen? And this conference, this national conference, was being held in the same city that person lived. And I remember, and I share this in much embarrassment because it's incredible to think that a person can be this deceived, but I share it on purpose. So it jars you, and you realize this is what deception does, and this is how powerful it is. I actually opened that brochure and I read that, and I said, God, you're so good to me. I was so deceived. I thought God orchestrated that. He loved me so much, and he wanted me to be so happy that he planned this trip that the church would pay for and send me on, no questions asked, and I got to go see this person and be with him for 5 days. That's what deception will do. That's where it'll take you. You believe what you believe, and nobody could have told me any different then. And I am sorry to say that I took that trip. I remember the night before I got on that plane. Was I overwrought with conviction that night? My heart had become hardened to that. I was so excited that night, I remember. I couldn't believe that I was really going to be loved and treasured. And I went there for 5 days, and I came home, and I was a basket case. Because then what do you do? When you're in that deception, it's all fantasy. So you don't figure out how the whole picture is going to work. I didn't want to lose my family. I didn't want to lose my husband. But yet I wanted this other world. I wanted this happiness. I couldn't. I came home not even being able to imagine life without this other person. Because finally, I felt like I could be myself. I could be lighthearted. I didn't have to be the heavy, responsible, carry the weight of relationship person, But see, that's all the deception. That's the picture that the enemy paints for us. That's the fantasy of it. Came home, left a letter for Tim on his computer. Still didn't have the courage or the guts to confront, be open and honest face to face. I left him a letter that just said, I'm gone. I'm done. And when I think back on that, what I expected him to respond with, I totally expected this too. I expected him to be mean, ugly, angry, loud, in my face about, how could you do this to us? How could you ruin my ministry like this? I mean, that's what I expected, because that's kind of what I had seen. I didn't see, he shares that he loved me, but I didn't know that. And that happens in so many marriages. We're so distant that we really don't know that the other person loves us. And I thought that he would be more angry with me at destroying him and hurting his reputation than anything. And I wasn't prepared for the work that God had started in him already. And he was instead very broken. I saw part of him I hadn't seen in years. He didn't care about losing his ministry. He didn't care. He wanted to do whatever it took to restore our relationship. And you would think at that I would be elated, because that kept our family together. And I was so about family. But I was so far down and so deceived that I wasn't ready for that. I was like, no, this isn't in the quotient. This isn't what I counted on. No, I'm going to go over here and be with this person, and the kids are going to understand because they see how you've, kind of been nasty, ugly, and so they're going to want to be with me, and so we're going to have this other little happy family over here, and that's what I fantasized about, and that's what I thought was going to happen. And those of you that have had to go through a divorce, and you've had to try to have a blended family, it's nothing like that. But that's the deception, that's the fantasy, that's what the enemy makes it out to be. Those of you that have loved ones, friends, that are in that deception right now, maybe this will help you understand where they are. They don't get it. They don't see clearly. And that's what we have to pray for them, to pray that the Holy Spirit will help them to see clearly. I got to a place, I only left him for 2 days, and I got to a place where I knew I needed to go back home. I do not know why. I cannot explain why the Holy Spirit was able to get through to my heart at that point and not weeks earlier. I don't know that. Someday, maybe I'll understand that better. And I'm sure it had all to do with me, not the Holy Spirit, that's for sure. But for some reason at that point, 2 days out, I realized, okay, I want what God wants for me more than I want to be happy. And so I made the decision to go back to Tim, thinking I was going to go back to a life of being miserable, thinking I was not just doing the right thing and yay for me. In my mind, it was like, do I want a life with this person that appeared so romantic and sensitive and tender, poetic, and a pastor? I mean, I'd still get to be in ministry, Or do I want to go back to Tim because that's the right thing, but I'm going to be miserable and lonely. I was just lonely and hungry for a relationship. Somehow the Holy Spirit helped me make the right decision. I went back to Tim, but because I had journeyed so far down on this disconnectedness, I had found myself in a position of being in addiction. I was addicted to that relationship. I was not able to break off the relationship. And bless Tim's heart, he stood by me for 6 awful, ugly weeks until we could go away and get some serious help. 6 weeks of me saying, yes, I want you, and an hour later he'd find me on the phone with this other person. 6 weeks of closing a mailbox that I had opened so this person could send me things, closing it, opening it, closing it, opening it a third time. That's a point of desperation. That is a painful place to be. And I don't forget that pain. It was awful. And I do not want you to ever have to experience that. Addiction is an awful, awful state. It's when we say, I want or I have to have what I want, no matter what the cost. We don't think rationally. It seems we aren't even able to control our own desires and our actions. That is where this journey will lead you. If you are anywhere on that journey tonight, even way at the top, recognize it, acknowledge it to your spouse, and do what it takes to stay off. Because unfortunately, we don't just stay on it at the level that we're at. We will journey down, down, down. Whether we want to, whether it's conscious or not, we will. And we don't want that for you. It's obvious that God has done a great work. We're here today. We're sharing this story because he was able to do a wonderful work. And I give God glory. He did that miracle for us. We have a marriage that we've never, ever had. I don't want to live a day without him. He's my best friend. I can be honest with him now.
Reality is complex. Life is complicated. There are consequences to sin, and sin can kill us. But we are here tonight to give you good news, to help you realize that God is in the restoration business, that God is here to refresh us, whether we're at the top of that journey where we're just tired, or whether we have found ourselves in the addiction stage. If you are just even dabbling in pornography, you're there.
Yeah.
You found something else to meet the need in your heart where your wife or your husband should be giving it to you. We don't know where any of you are at, but what we do know is because we've traveled the United States sharing this story and sharing this true intimacy message, we know that there are many that are lonely in their own home. There are many that just say, I want to be loved. There are many that are hurting, that have been through terrible pain. They're trying to find a way back out. And we're here to tell you tonight that there is a way, that God has an answer for you, that he designed you for true intimacy. Tonight, we want you to go home. We'd like you to do the homework together on page 7. We'd like you to find a quiet place and answer those 3 questions. And again, I reiterate that they are not yes or no answers. They are meant to open your hearts. We know that the hour is late. But we ask you to find that time, whether it be tonight or maybe you get up earlier in the morning if you're morning people. And you'd like to do it before you come back here tomorrow morning as we continue. We just ask you to please do yourself the favor to open your hearts in such a way. We promise you that if you do, you'll come back here tomorrow making statements that perhaps tonight will be the first night, the first day of the rest of your life. We've had couples come to us that have been married 20, 25, 30 years and have told us that what they do on this night of our conference was more intimate. They connected at a deeper level than they had their entire married life. Most of us weren't prepared for marriage. Most of us didn't really have the tools we needed. We hope that tonight and this weekend will give you the tools that will give you true intimacy, what God intended for you from the beginning. Bow your hearts with me in prayer. Father, thank you for this night. As Linda and I have shared our lives, opened our hearts, shared our painful story with them, may our honesty and transparency translate into that kind of honesty, transparency, and openness with one another. As they share those potential areas of pain or disappointment, let it not be a thing that causes disruption or anger or defensiveness, but instead humility and brokenness and awareness of where they might be, and that they never intended their spouse to be in that place if that's in fact where they're at. I pray for tonight to be the beginning of a turnaround, so that as we move into the understanding of other-centeredness and realize that you intended us to enjoy a slice of heaven here on earth in our married lives, Lord, let us be prepared in our hearts to be able to receive that tomorrow. This we pray in Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen.